Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and today I am here to accompany you on your journey to sleep. Before we begin, relax, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now lie back, close your eyes, and let this story take you into a mystical space with the background music of pattering rain. One rainy night, I was curled up on the sofa, engrossed in an exciting detective show. I was wondering whether to watch another episode or go to sleep when the shrill ringing of my phone startled me, causing me to drop the popcorn on my lap. Looking at the screen, I saw an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then picked up, my voice low in the silence of the apartment. Hello? There was no answer, just a hoarse breath, a hint of confusion. I repeated the greeting, feeling a sense of frustration rising, but the line abruptly went dead. I shrugged, reassuring myself that it was a wrong number, then tossed the phone aside and went back to watching the movie. But after only 15 minutes, the phone rang again. It was the same number. This time, I let it go to voicemail. Just then, my phone vibrated with a new voicemail. Curious, I picked it up. The same hoarse voice rang again with a menacing exhale. I can see you. A chill ran down my spine. I deleted the message and blocked the number, my hands shaking slightly. It's probably just a stalker, I told myself. I got up to make some tea, hoping it would calm me down. As I waited for the water to boil, I looked out the window at the quiet streetlights. The only thing visible was the silent cars parked and a few trees swaying in the wind. I sat back in my chair holding a warm cup of chamomile tea, trying to focus on the movie, but the whispered message kept ringing in my head. I can see you. And then my phone buzzed again, this time a text message from another unknown number. Nice pajamas. Looking down at my old Star Wars pajamas, I felt a shiver run through me. How could they know what I was wearing? I jumped up and closed the blinds, my heart pounding in my chest. I called 911, trembling, telling them about the threatening calls, but the dispatcher calmly said they couldn't send the police unless there was an immediate threat. They just told me to lock my doors and call back if I saw anyone suspicious. As soon as I hung up, my phone rang again. I couldn't help but pick it up, trying to sound tough. Don't call me again. The response was a chilling chuckle and a slow voice. We're just getting started, Sarah. Hearing my name, my blood froze. Who is this? What do you want? The strange voice replied, I want you to look out the window, Sarah. I have a surprise for you. Every sense of my being warned me not to do so, but my legs urged me to walk towards the window. I pulled the curtains back just a little, and my heart sank when I saw a figure standing across the street, hidden behind a tree, staring at my apartment. I pulled the blinds down and stumbled back, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. My phone buzzed with a new message. I told you I can see you. Panic seized me, and I ran into the bedroom, slamming the door shut and shoving the heavy dresser against it. Huddled in the corner, I dialed 911 again, my voice shaking. There's someone outside my apartment. They're calling and texting me. They're watching me. Please help me. The dispatcher assured me that they would send a patrol car to check and told me to stay inside. I turned off the car, curled up, and waited in silence, startled by every little noise like the hum of the refrigerator or rustling leaves outside. And then I suddenly realized that I had forgotten to close the bedroom curtains. Right in front of me on the window frame was a pale, frightened face. I screamed when I saw someone pressing their face against the glass, grinning. I jumped out of bed, fell to the floor, and scrambled away from the window. When I looked back, the face was gone. In a panic, I huddled in the corner of the room, waiting for the police to arrive, hoping they would save me from the darkness and the nightmares that were already present in real life. In the silence of the room, I was afraid to step outside, but then a loud knock on the bedroom door startled me. I let out a small cry, and a voice came from the other side of the door. Sarah, this is Officer Martinez from the police department. Are you okay? Feeling much relieved, I immediately replied, Yes, I'm here. My voice was shaking. With my still shaking arm, I pushed the cabinet blocking the door aside, turned the lock, and when the door opened, 2 policemen stood there, their faces filled with worry. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" Officer Martinez asked, his tone concerned. I shook my head. "No, but there was someone standing at my window right there." I pointed toward the window, but when I looked out, there was only empty darkness. The 2 officers conducted a thorough search of the apartment and the surrounding area. When they were done, they returned and said they found no signs of an intruder, nor any footprints under the window. Officer Chen added, "Your fire escape is securely locked, and there is no way someone could have climbed into that window without equipment." I nodded vigorously, affirming, I definitely saw him there, staring at me. I showed them my phone to prove the threatening messages and calls. But strangely, all the messages from unknown numbers had disappeared, as if they had never existed. The policemen exchanged looks that I couldn't understand. Officer Martinez asked gently, "Miss Carter, is there anyone who can stay with you tonight? A friend or family member, perhaps?" I shook my head, feeling disappointed. "My family is out of state and my friends are all the way across town." "Okay," Martinez said. "We'll have a patrol car in the area for the rest of the night. Try to get some rest and don't hesitate to call us if anything happens." After the police left, I double-checked all the locks, closed all the windows, turned on all the lights, and turned up the music to drown out any sounds that might scare me. Deep down, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. I paced the living room, startled by every little noise, a car passing by, a gust of wind rattling the windows. My phone remained silent until the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains. Finally, I felt a little relieved. I had made it through the night. Maybe it was all just a stress-induced hallucination. But just as that sense of security began to take hold, my phone buzzed with a new message. With shaking hands, I opened the message. "Good morning, Sarah. Missing me? Don't worry, I'll see you soon. Good night." Attached to the message was a photo of me sleeping on the couch, clearly taken from inside my apartment. I dropped the phone to the floor as if it were burning. It couldn't be. The police had checked everything, and I had been up all night. But as panic rose in my throat, threatening to choke my every breath, my eyes caught the remote control next to me. The show was playing on a strange loop. I realized that I hadn't watched anything last night. Instead, I had been watching my own life, recorded and replayed. A terrifying question slowly emerged in my mind. How long have they been watching me? And the scariest thing was they were still here. As if to answer that question, I heard light footsteps coming from behind. A creak from inside my wall, a sound I always thought was old pipes or settling foundations. I now knew better. My phone vibrated again, and I looked at the screen and got ready for the next episode. It's still raining outside, feeling like lying in a warm blanket. Listening to my stories mixed with the gentle sound of rain. You feel more comfortable, right? Don't fall asleep. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Relax and listen. This story begins on a drizzly night, on a deserted highway. My headlights cut through the darkness, and the familiar hum of the engine echoed, creating a steady and peaceful rhythm. The road ahead stretched out like an endless black silk strip, only faintly lit by the stars above. I was in no hurry, just leisurely enjoying the absolute silence of the night. But that night was different, as if a storm was brewing. My heart was beating faster than usual. In the middle of the night, when everything was as quiet as if I was sleeping, I suddenly noticed the headlights of a car in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another person driving along the same road, but when I looked back, I saw something strange. The car was still following me, maintaining a distance that was not too far, but not too close. Whether I tried to accelerate or slow down, it moved rhythmically with me, like a shadow. My stomach sank, a feeling of unease spreading as the car's dim lights lurked. I turned on the radio, hoping the sound would dispel my anxiety. But the car followed, hidden in the shadows, as if waiting for something. After a while, I saw a stop sign. As if I had found an escape route, I turned on my signal and hoped the other car would continue straight. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, my heart sank. It had followed me into the parking lot. My heart was pounding when I saw it parked just 2 spaces away from me. I didn't understand. There were plenty of empty spaces, but the car was parked close by, as if it wanted me to notice it. I got out of the car, trying to act casual. The windows were tinted. I couldn't see who was inside, but I could feel someone's eyes following my every move. Taking a deep breath to calm myself, I walked into a nearby convenience store, pretending to buy a bottle of water to calm my nerves. It was coldly quiet inside, with only one employee sitting behind the counter, his eyes glued to his phone screen. I picked up my bottle of water, went to the counter to pay, and glanced at the car outside the window. It was still there, engine still running, headlights still on, as if someone was waiting silently, with no intention of leaving. I asked the clerk, "Have you seen anyone strange or odd around here at night?" He shrugged, replying in a casual tone, "Sometimes there are a few people like that. On the highway, no one knows who is who." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped out of the store, hoping the strange car would be gone, but it wasn't. It was still there, and the driver's side window was open just a crack, creating a blurry space from which I could feel eyes on me from inside. My heart raced as I hurried toward my car, fumbling for my keys. I opened the door, slid inside, and locked it, my fingers still shaking on the steering wheel. I sat there panting, not daring to move. But when I looked back in the rearview mirror, the strange car had moved a little further away, as if it had been waiting for me. I didn't hesitate any longer, driving back onto the highway. But as soon as I accelerated, the car reappeared in the mirror, following me at a closer distance, its headlights shining like a stalking gaze. I tried to sway and change lanes, but the car kept following me. When I felt my endurance was at its limit, I saw the light from a gas station ahead. As if I had found a way out, I turned sharply into the station. This time I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw the strange car continue to rush past without stopping. Its taillights gradually dimmed, then completely disappeared into the night. I sat there in the car, eyes closed, breathing deeply, trying to calm my still pounding heart. The gas station attendant glanced curiously at me from behind the counter, but I didn't care anymore. I continued my journey that night, and the strange car never returned. To this day, I have no idea who it was or what they wanted. It could have been a prank, or it could have been a hidden danger. But what I've learned is that, even on the most familiar roads, you never really know who's watching you. Just close your eyes and let this story gently wash over you, like the night rain outside lulling you into a deep, peaceful sleep. The night sky was drizzling, each drop falling evenly on the corrugated iron roof, the gentle sound like the gentle music of nature, lessening the silence of the vast fields. Standing in that space, I felt the coolness of the wind, the faint scent of moist soil. The sky was dark. Only a few streaks of orange and purple from the sunset had just faded. The rain kept falling, gently but enough to make the atmosphere heavy, as if something was waiting. That night I stood by the old tractor in the field, trying to fix some broken parts. I had worked late like this many times, but there was something different about the air tonight. Darkness was slowly closing in, and a light rain added to the oppressive silence. In the distance, cows were pacing, snorting and moaning in the rain, unlike their usual self. A strange unease rose in me, like the calm before a storm. When I raised my head, wiping the grease off my hands through the light rain, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the field, right at the border with the forest. The person was motionless in the dark, facing me, not moving at all. The rain was getting heavier, each drop falling on the leaves, creating a whispering melody like small words in the dark. At that moment, I hesitated, not daring to ask because an invisible worry seemed to be preventing me. I looked more closely through the rain and realized that the figure was unlike anyone I had ever seen. They stood there, as still as a statue, unnaturally stiff. The rain made the strangeness of their posture even more apparent to me. The cows in the distance began to huddle closer together, making anxious sounds as if they too sensed that something was wrong. And then, the figure jerked suddenly, as if pulled by a string. Even though it was only a step, the movement chilled my skin as if the raindrops were a warning. The figure moved little by little towards me, step by step, but it was not walking, but rather gliding unnaturally through the night. In that moment, I retreated step by step towards the warehouse, trying to keep my eyes on them. The rain was getting heavier, pattering on the roof of the barn, each drop sounding like an echo of fear. I rushed into the barn, closed the door tightly, and stood still, listening only to the steady patter of the rain on the roof. A feeling of being watched came over me. Through the small crack in the door, I glanced outside, but saw no one. Darkness and heavy rain covered the field. Then, I suddenly saw not one, but 3 figures standing upright in the middle of the grassland under the rain. All 3 were motionless, their heads tilted slightly as if looking at me. I stood frozen, holding my breath, not daring to move. The sound of the rain still falling steadily, mingling with the sound of my heart pounding, each beat seeming to match the rhythm of the rain. Finally, I decided to run home. Looking closely through the crack of the door, the 3 figures were still standing there, motionless as if in defiance. Counting to 3, I pushed open the barn door and rushed out into the middle of the field, the rain pouring down on my face, my feet covered in mud. The sound of the rain falling on the field echoed like a sound chasing my footsteps, each drop urging me to hurry. I rushed into the house, slammed the door, and locked it. Sweat and rain mixed on my forehead. I looked out the window, hoping they were gone. But no, they were closer, standing at the edge of the yard, heads tilted slightly, bodies blurred in the glittering rain. They stood there, motionless in the pouring rain, just silently looking at my house. One of them raised his hand, slowly pointing at me, his eyes glinting strangely in the darkness. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling that this was not human. I picked up the phone, tried to call the neighbors, but no one answered. All night, I kept my eyes glued to the window, listening to the steady, rhythmic sound of the rain, soothing but also threatening, wondering who or what those figures were. When dawn came, they were gone, but I never forgot that rainy night. Sometimes, in the rainy nights, I still feel like there is someone somewhere, standing in the dark, waiting. It was getting closer to autumn, and the nights were colder than usual. The rain kept pounding against the windows, and the suburbs were filled with a steady patter, like whispers from the darkness. A small family, Tom and Marie and their daughter Emily, had recently moved into the house. The old wooden house, which had passed through many owners, was located on the edge of a dense forest. That night, Tom had to work the night shift at the company, leaving Marie and Emily at home. Marie turned on a few lights in the house, listened to the sound of the rain falling in sheets, and carefully locked all the doors. The atmosphere was hazy because of the rain. The darkness outside was as thick as a curtain hiding something. Marie heard Emily's laughter from upstairs, the cute sound of a child playing with a doll. But then the laughter died down, replaced by an eerie silence. Marie frowned, feeling that something was wrong, but reassured herself. Sometimes children just need a little silence. But as the night wore on, Marie began to sense something unusual. In the midst of the rain, she heard a light tapping on the living room window. At first, Marie thought it was just a tree branch tapping against the glass, but the tapping became more regular, as if someone was deliberately making it. She approached the window, telling herself that she must have imagined it. Looking out, Marie saw a figure standing just behind the window. In the dim light of the street lamp, the figure's face was unclear, but it stood straight, staring at the window. Marie jumped, stepped back, her heart pounding. She tried to scream but realized that the figure had disappeared, completely without a trace. Marie felt a cold air rush into the house. She immediately checked the doors, making sure they were all locked. The sound of the rain outside was like a constant music, urging her to stay awake. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that she was just paranoid. Just then, Marie heard a sound from upstairs. Emily's laughter, then a strange whisper. She breathed a sigh of relief, certain that it was only Emily. But as she climbed the stairs, her steps heavy with the strange feeling that had overwhelmed her, she realized something that made her heart stop. Emily had fallen asleep on the sofa in the living room. Her only daughter lay there, breathing evenly and deeply, clearly not the one who had been laughing and whispering upstairs. Marie swallowed, her whole body trembling. If Emily was sleeping here, then who was upstairs? She stood rooted to the spot for a long moment, her eyes glued to the stairs leading upstairs. Her mind was torn between running away and investigating, but her motherly instincts urged her to make sure everything was okay. She put Emily down, told herself she would be right back, and started up the stairs, each step taking forever. When she reached Emily's door, she heard a soft breathing sound, as if someone was standing very close. Marie opened the door slowly, her heart pounding. The room was only dimly lit by the nightlight. Everything seemed normal. But then a chill ran down her spine when she saw, in the corner of the room, there was a shadow of a woman with long hair, wearing a white dress, standing with her back turned, silently in the darkness. The person did not move, but Marie felt the terrifying presence from that figure. Marie stepped back, but panic held her in place. The woman slowly turned around, and her face was shapeless, but her empty eyes stared straight at Marie, as if she had been waiting for her all along. A twisted smile appeared on her face, and in the cold space a haunting whisper rang out. "Don't worry, I'm just visiting Emily." Marie screamed, turned and ran out of the room, carrying Emily down the stairs, not daring to look back. She rushed out of the house, ignoring the pouring rain on her, the cold wind seeping into every corner of her mind. She held Emily tightly, standing in the rain, waiting for Tom to come home. When Tom arrived and tried to calm her down, they entered the house. Everything was quiet, as if nothing had happened. They checked the house, but found no trace of anyone else. From that night on, Marie never slept alone in that house again. Every time it rained, the cold feeling and the haunting memories returned, reminding her of the strange woman in her daughter's room. The woman with the crooked smile and empty eyes, who she knew for sure somewhere in the rainy night was still waiting to visit Emily again. As the sky darkened, rain began to fall on the eaves, each drop falling steadily. Mark, a forester, was assigned to check the lighting system along the trails near a lake in the middle of the forest. That night, as the rain continued to fall, Mark drove into the woods. The road was dark, and the car headlights were blurred in the heavy rain. He was a seasoned man, often going into the woods late at night, but that night made Mark feel strangely uncomfortable. Despite the cold rain, the air seemed thicker and harder to breathe than usual. As he approached the lake, he stopped the car, checked his flashlight, and walked into the rain, listening to the soft earth crunch under his feet. In the pouring rain, Mark suddenly heard a soft laugh, a sweet but strange sound. He stopped and listened, trying to convince himself that it could be the wind or simply the sound of running water. But when the laughter rang out again, Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Is anyone there?" he called out, trying to stay calm. But the only answer was the sound of the rain and the lifeless silence of the forest. Mark continued walking forward, but as his flashlight passed over an old tree, he saw a small shadow move between the trunks. His heart was pounding, but he decided to move closer. As he approached the old tree, his flashlight shone on a small figure, a little girl with long black hair, wearing a white dress and jet black eyes, standing in the rain, staring at him. Mark stepped back in surprise, stammering, "Hey, little girl, what are you doing here?" The little girl didn't answer, just stood still, gave a small smile and whispered, "You shouldn't be here. It's too dark." The whisper was cold, evoking an eerie silence. Mark felt frozen. Each cold wind carrying the scent of rain penetrated his coat. But when he looked back, the little girl had disappeared into the rain. leaving only small footprints imprinted on the ground. Mark tried to walk on, but each step seemed heavier. The girl's whispers echoed in his head, the strange words haunting him. The small footsteps sounded behind him, getting closer, but when he turned around, there was no one there, just a trail of rain. Terrified, Mark started to turn back, but on the way back, he saw the girl looming ahead every few steps, appearing and disappearing. This time she was closer, her face showing a twisted smile. Her black eyes in the darkness seemed to see right through him. The rain was heavier, colder, as if the night air in the forest had become thick and hard to breathe. He ran as fast as he could back to the car, not daring to look back. When Mark got back into the car, he slammed the door shut and drove away, trying not to think about that terrifying face. As he drove out of the woods, the rain began to stop and it became ominously quiet. But after only a few miles, he heard heavy breathing coming from the back seat. Mark turned his head and his heart stopped. Right behind the driver's seat was a girl with long black hair, sitting there silently, her empty eyes staring straight at him. Without saying a word, the little girl just looked, her eyes bottomless and black, and her twisted smile slowly widened, bit by bit, as if the deep darkness was taking over. The familiar whisper rang out again, as soft as the wind. "It's very dark. You shouldn't be here." That night, Mark never remembered how he left that forest, but from then on, he never dared to set foot in that place on a rainy night again. That mysterious girl, no one knew who she was and why she appeared in that deep forest. People living around the area said that on rainy nights, sometimes they saw a small figure with long black hair standing silently by the lake, looking towards the deep forest, and never knew what the girl really wanted. That story will continue to echo in the rainy night, becoming a part of the cold darkness, reminding everyone that sometimes there are things that are best avoided, especially when the rain falls in the middle of a mysterious forest. Have you slept yet? If you're still listening to my story, please comment and interact with me and subscribe to the channel so we can meet every day. I will tell this story as if I had experienced it myself on a rainy night in the Hudson Valley, New York. Imagine the steady sound of rain, the pattering sound echoing in the deserted night, covering everything in an eerie silence. That night I was home alone, curled up on the sofa, reading a book and occasionally glancing out the window to watch the rain. The light from the living room lamp shone on the glass, creating blurred streaks. I felt a sense of peace enveloping me, the sound of the rain like a gentle lullaby making the space even more quiet. I was almost asleep when I heard a knock on the door. At first I ignored it. It must have been a branch or something hitting the door in the strong wind. But as the knocking became more regular and louder, I realized that something was wrong. An indescribable unease began to rise in my heart, and hesitantly, I walked towards the living room window. When I looked out, through the rain-soaked glass, I saw a figure standing just outside, silently under the rain. The person was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. His face was hidden, but I could clearly feel his eyes staring at me. My heart stopped for a moment. A chill ran down my spine. In a panic, I took a step back, not daring to take my eyes off the window, but when I turned back to look again, the figure had disappeared. I told myself that I must have imagined it, that perhaps it was the light or the darkness that caused the hallucination, but the coldness did not go away. The rain continued to fall heavily outside, drowning me in a stifling atmosphere of fear. A few minutes later, I regained my composure, trying to shake off my fear, but when I looked at the window again, I was stunned. On the glass, right in front of where the man had been standing, there was a clear, small, wet handprint. The strange thing was that the handprint seemed to have been made from the inside, as if someone had stood in my living room and pressed their hand against the glass to look out. A chill ran through my body. My heart was pounding, and in that moment, I realized that I wasn't really alone that night. Soon, I heard from people around the Hudson Valley. They also told of strange knocks on doors in the rain, and a silent, unidentified figure who would appear and disappear into the night. That night, I never dared to look out the window again. And every time it started to rain, the memory of that handprint would return, making me wonder, was I really alone in my house? That night, it was pouring rain. My family and I decided to go on a weekend picnic, and unfortunately, as soon as we arrived at the campsite, the rain started pouring down heavily. We all regretted our decision, but the thought of driving back home in the middle of the night was even more tiring. So we decided to spend the night in the car. Listening to the rain hitting the car windows and the tin roof of the camper, my family slowly fell asleep. That night, the air was so quiet that I could almost hear the pattering of rain. The air was dim, and apart from the faint light from the car, everything was swallowed by darkness and rain. I was dozing off when I was suddenly awakened by a strange sound. It was laughter, a soft, gentle laugh that echoed somewhere outside the car. At first I thought it was the wind whistling through the trees, but as I listened more closely, I realized that the sound was clearly someone else's laughter. I sat up straight, turned to look at my wife and daughter sleeping soundly in the back seat, then looked out the window. But beyond the white curtain of rain and the deep darkness, I could see nothing. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe it was the sound of running water, but when the laughter came again, clearer, closer, as if someone were standing right outside the car window, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air outside seemed thick, stifling, and heavy. I sat still, trying not to move, listening. The laughter stopped, replaced by a whisper. I heard it so softly I could barely make out the words, but it felt like someone was mumbling incoherent words. My heart began to beat faster and fear filled me. I glanced out the windows around the car, afraid to see something. And then through the rain-dampened glass, I saw a figure, a man standing just outside the driver's window. His head was tilted slightly to one side, his face pale and wan in the darkness with a crooked smile. He stared at me, his eyes empty, the smile never stopping, and his low laugh rang out like a terrifying mockery. I tried to calm myself, but every sense was warning me of danger. I didn't dare take my eyes off him, afraid that if I looked away, something worse would happen. I considered waking my wife, but I was afraid that doing so would only bring him closer. As he continued to laugh, I tried to close my eyes, telling myself that this was just an illusion, that fatigue and the rain were scaring me. But when I opened them again, he was still there, even closer than before. I could see the raindrops running down his pale face, and his eyes never left me. I tried to find my phone in my pocket to call someone, but my hand was shaking so much that I could barely keep the phone still. At that moment, he started tapping on the window. Not loudly, just soft taps, but they terrified me. Each tap was loud, steady, as if he was testing the glass to see if it would shatter easily. At that moment, I decided to wake my wife and daughter up. I called my wife's name softly, and when she opened her eyes, I motioned for silence, pointing towards the window. Her face changed from surprise to panic as soon as she saw him. He still smiled, tapping lightly on the glass door, and this time I heard a clearer whisper, vague but haunting. "You can't hide." I reached up to lock the car door, just to make sure it was locked, and my wife held our daughter tightly. The whole family sat still, trying not to breathe heavily. Outside, he was still standing there, still laughing, still repeating the same line. "You can't escape." We decided to leave immediately. I turned the key, started the engine, and quickly backed up, my eyes never leaving the figure outside the window. As the wheels rolled across the wet ground, I saw him step back, just a few steps, and then watch us leave, his crooked smile never fading. We drove straight out of the woods, not daring to look back. In the pouring rain, I occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, afraid that he would appear behind us, but fortunately, we escaped. That night, my family did not speak a word to each other. We all tried to forget what we had witnessed, but the image of that strange man never left my mind. And since then, Every time I hear laughter or a knock on the car door, I feel an invisible fear rising up, wondering if he really disappeared. Let me tell you a story that happened one stormy night in the Texas countryside. That day, my friends and I decided to try something new, explore an abandoned house that was rumored to be haunted. The house was hidden deep in the woods, a place that without a guide or a detailed map, you would be hard-pressed to find your way out. The rumors surrounding the house were equally creepy: ghosts roaming the dark rooms, silent footsteps on the wooden floors, and haunting whispers in the night. But we, young and reckless, thought it was fun. That evening, it rained harder than expected, but the rain only added to the thrill of the adventure. Despite the discomfort of getting our coats soaked, the group of us braved the bumpy road to the abandoned house. It was a large, old, dark wooden house in the middle of the forest. The lights had been extinguished years ago. The rain fell incessantly, mixed with the thunder and lightning and the rustling of trees in the wind, creating an eerie atmosphere. As we stood before the old door, we all sensed something strange. No one said anything, but everyone in the group had suspicious eyes. I touched the wooden door, pushed it open, and the door let out a long creaking sound, like a lament from deep within the house. Inside, the musty smell hit our noses. Everything was dark and cold. We turned on our flashlights, and the dim light filtered through the corners of the room, revealing old, dusty furniture. The walls were stained with stains, and the picture frames were bare, with only traces of photos removed, leaving blank spaces on the walls, as if this house had once been filled with memories that had long since been forgotten. The rain pounding on the roof made an eerie sound, like someone whispering from above. We walked deeper, walking silently across the rotting wooden floors, feeling the wood creak as we stepped. That's when I heard something strange. Light footsteps. Very light, but not from any of us. I stopped, turned to look at my friends. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. They looked at me, their eyes filled with concern. We fell silent, listening, and this time, we all heard it. Creepy footsteps, like someone was pacing slowly upstairs. We looked at each other. No one dared to speak, but no one had any intention of backing down. Recklessly, the group decided to go upstairs to check. The stairs creaked under our weight, and the sound echoed eerily in the strange silence of the abandoned house. When we reached the upper floor, the flashlight beam shone down the long hallway, and we all froze in place. There, at the end of the dark hallway, was a figure. The figure stood still, hazy in the weak light of the flashlight, but clearly had the shape of a human. My heart stopped beating. The figure did not move, just stood silently, head slightly bowed as if waiting. Fear filled me, but out of curiosity I still tried to move closer. When I was only about 10 steps away from the figure, I realized something terrifying. The figure had no face. Where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only a gap, black and empty. I took a deep breath, stepped back, whispered to my friends to turn around. But as soon as I turned, I heard footsteps that were groaning and heavy, as if the figure was approaching us. Each of his footsteps echoed in the hallway, urgent and threatening, making me feel like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. We ran, rushing down the stairs like crazy, not daring to look back. The footsteps were still right behind us, each beat haunting. Finally, we rushed outside into the pouring rain. We stood panting, each cold drop of rain falling, but the feeling of safety still did not return. I turned back to look at the house, and right in front of the upstairs window, I saw the figure, not moving, but the invisible eyes seemed to be watching us leave, silently in the rain. No one in the group said a word. All stood rooted to the spot, looking up at the figure until it gradually faded into the darkness. We never spoke of that night. Whenever I think of that house, I still can't figure out what that faceless figure was, or why he was standing there waiting for us at the end of the hallway. And on cold, rainy Texas nights, when the rain patters on the roof, I remember the sound of footsteps following behind me. a sound that will stay with me forever, unforgettable. That night, Seattle was drenched in a thick rain, each heavy drop falling on the dark streets, tapping on the hood and the road like a steady, gloomy song. I drove alone on the deserted mountain road, fog and rain everywhere, limiting visibility. My headlights only illuminated the road ahead for a short distance, then were swallowed up in the rain. It was very late at night, and apart from the sound of the rain, the surrounding space was silent, as if the whole world was asleep. While driving, I suddenly saw a blurry figure ahead, a woman standing right on the side of the road, her white shirt fluttering in the rain, her long hair falling down, covering her face. Although I couldn't see her face clearly from the car lights, I could feel her thin, fragile figure as if the darkness and rain were about to swallow her at any moment. I slowed down, feeling a sense of anxiety rising in my heart. I didn't know why, but maybe it was because the rain was so cold, so my instincts urged me to stop. I slowly rolled down the car window and asked loudly, "Do you need help?" She didn't answer, just stood there silently, her face slightly lowered, and I saw her eyes seem to flash in the car lights, but cold and empty. A chill ran down my spine as she slowly raised her face, her lips curled into a strange smile. A smile without any vitality, without warmth, only cold sadness remained. "You won't be able to escape either," she said in a whisper, as light as the wind, but each word seemed to penetrate the thick rain and reach me. I was shocked by her words, and an inexplicable fear rose in my heart. Confused, I tried to turn on the headlights to see her more clearly, but at that moment, she had disappeared. There was nothing left but the heavy rain, and the road was as empty as before. I turned around to look for her, but she had completely disappeared, as if she had never been there. I tried to reassure myself that I was tired. Maybe it was my fatigue that made me imagine it. But the strangeness didn't stop there. As I continued driving, just about to accelerate, I suddenly saw her appear again, right in front of the car, just a few meters away. She stood there motionless in the rain, her eyes on me again. My heart pounded, my hands tightened on the steering wheel, and this time, I could see her eyes clearly, empty and deep like a black abyss. I tried to stay calm, but every time I stepped on the gas to pass her, I saw her again, as if she were repeating herself. She appeared a short distance away, right on the road leading out of the mountains. It felt like I was trapped in a terrifying loop, wondering if I would ever be able to escape her shadow. I became more and more panicked. Finally, I stopped the car, intending to turn around and go another way, but as I turned to turn on the lights, I saw her sitting in the passenger seat next to me. She didn't look at me, just sat there silently, her eyes staring straight ahead, but the atmosphere in the car seemed to freeze. A chill spread. My breathing stopped, and fear filled the small space of the car. "You'll never escape," she whispered again, the words soft but haunting, like a curse. And when I was about to ask, she was gone, leaving the seat empty and the cold humidity permeating the space. Terrified, I drove away from that area, passing the bends without daring to look back. I didn't know if she was really a ghost or just an illusion created by the night rain. But to this day, every time I drive past that road on rainy nights, I always look around, feeling like her empty eyes and cold voice are still chasing me, forever not letting me escape the terrifying memory of that rainy night in Seattle. It happened on an unforgettable rainy night in the Chattahoochee Forest in Georgia. where my family and I were camping for the weekend. It's a vast, dense forest known for its misty hills and abundant wildlife. But what's most special about this place is that it's often haunted by mysterious stories of things that people can't explain. That night, with the relentless rain and the absolute isolation in the wilderness, we felt the mystery, but we had no idea that it would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The first night passed peacefully as we sat around the campfire, laughing and talking, watching the rain patter on the dense foliage. But on the second night, as the heavy rain began to fall, things began to get strange. The campfire died down, and we huddled in the tent preparing for bed. Everything was quiet with the steady rain, and I thought it would be another quiet night. Until in the middle of the night, a faint sound came from outside the tent, a baby's cry. At first, I wasn't sure if I had actually heard it. I thought it might be the wind whistling through the trees or a bird calling in the night. But the cry grew clearer, more rhythmic, like a child lost and panicking in the woods. I woke my wife up, asking if she heard the sound. She frowned, and then she heard it. The crying grew louder and louder, echoing through the night, making the air in the tent suddenly cold and gloomy. My daughter, who had been sleeping soundly, suddenly woke up and asked in a trembling voice, "Mommy, who's crying?" Unable to leave it alone, I decided to go check. Carrying a flashlight and a pocket knife in my hand, I took a deep breath and opened the tent flap, stepping out into the rain. The space outside the tent was pitch black, only the faint light from the flashlight shining through the heavy rain. I looked around, feeling anxious, but the faint crying still echoed somewhere in the night. The crying seemed to lead me deeper into the forest, each step hitting the wet ground, each footstep drowned out by the rain and thunder. I walked forward, the flashlight beam gliding through the trees, and the space around me seemed darker, eerily quiet, as if the jungle wanted to swallow me up in darkness. The feeling that someone or something was watching me from behind made me shiver even more. As I walked deeper into the forest, the crying suddenly stopped. I stood still, listening, but there was only the steady sound of rain, mixed with the rustling of leaves in the wind. I decided to turn back, but just then, I heard light footsteps behind me, very light, as if someone was following my footsteps. My heart pounded, and I turned around, but there was no one, only pitch black darkness. I hurried back the way I came, but felt lost. The dense trees blocked the path, and I was no longer sure which way was the way back to the tent. In a panic, I shined my flashlight in every direction, and then, the light caught a strange object lying under the tree, an old dirty doll with a cracked face and empty eyes. I felt like something was wrong, but when I was about to turn around, the crying rang out again, right behind me. I froze in place, clearly feeling the cold breath of the darkness surrounding me. I slowly turned around, and this time, I saw a child. It was a little girl, in an old torn dress, standing in the rain, her empty eyes staring at me. Her pale face was blurred by the rain, but I could feel that her eyes were full of sadness and loneliness. The girl didn't say anything, just stood there silently looking at me, and in her eyes, I felt an endless sadness. I tried to step back, feeling like all my strength was drained. At that moment, the girl reached out her hand, as if wanting me to come closer. Her voice spoke, weak but clear. "Don't follow the crying. That's not a person." My heart was pounding, and in a panic, I turned and ran. I didn't dare look back, running through every tree, my feet tripping, slipping through the mud. The crying gradually faded behind me, but the feeling of something still following me, like an invisible ghost following me. Finally, I reached the tent, exhausted and shaking. My wife and daughter were still there, looking at me with worried eyes. I told them everything and decided that we had to leave the forest immediately. We packed up our things in the relentless rain and quickly drove away from the area. On the way home, my daughter suddenly said, "Dad, I saw that girl. She was standing right outside the tent, looking at me through the fabric. Her eyes were so sad." When I heard my daughter's words, I felt like an electric current ran down my spine. I didn't know who that girl was, or why she appeared in the middle of the forest in that rain, but from that day on, I always remembered her haunting warning. Don't follow the cry. That's not a person. It was late at night, and the rain was pouring down incessantly. It was a damp and cold night when I decided to drive home on the deserted road. The road wound between the fields and the dark forest, with only the headlights of the car being the only source of light that pierced the darkness. As I was passing through a stretch of road filled with trees, I suddenly saw a faint light in the distance. My heart beat fast. It was an old telephone booth. Perhaps it had been so long since anyone remembered the existence of these telephone booths. The booth stood there, alone in the rain, the light inside flickering, like a signal from the past. Instinctively, I slowed down and stopped the car on the side of the road. An indescribable curiosity took over me, urging me to get out of the car and approach the booth. I walked through the rain towards the dim light. As I got closer, I was startled to see a woman standing inside, her hand pressed to her phone, her eyes staring straight ahead as if waiting for someone to listen. The woman looked very strange. Her long dress was soaked with rain, her black hair was down, hiding her face. Even with only the dim light from the phone booth, I could still make out her pale lips moving slightly, as if she was talking to someone. But all around was pouring rain, and the night was silent. Not a single person, not a single car except mine. Standing far away, I heard a short snippet of the conversation from the phone booth, echoing in the night. "Hello, it's me. I'm still here, waiting." The voice was weak, broken, mixed with the sound of the rain, but there was something about it that made me feel choked and creepy, like a lost person, trying to contact someone in the other world. I stepped back, trying to tell myself that it was just an illusion in the rain. Just as I was about to return to my car, my phone suddenly rang. I was so startled that I almost dropped the phone. When I looked at the screen, I realized that the number was coming from that phone booth, the booth where the woman was standing. In a panic, I raised my hand to my ear, trying to muster up the courage to answer. On the other end of the line, a desperate voice rang out, "I can't get out. Don't leave me here." I quickly turned off the engine, jumped into the car, and drove away. But the image of that woman, her empty eyes, pale face, and desperate voice, haunted me forever. From then on, I never drove that road at night, especially on rainy nights. It was a rainy night in suburban Washington state. This story took place last fall, when I took a night delivery job to make extra money. Driving in the rain is not a pleasant experience, but I was used to rainy nights passing by with music playing and headlights flashing. That night the sky was pitch black, with only the patter of rain outside the car window as my companion. Around midnight, I received a delivery order from a remote suburb. The address was in a remote area, far from the densely populated residential areas. The area was unfamiliar to me, but it was part of the job, and I didn't think much of it as I pressed the GPS and drove in that direction. As the car passed through the winding paths between the trees, I began to sense something was wrong. The houses were sparse, the streetlights were rare, and the rain was getting thicker, greatly reducing visibility. The place was strangely quiet, making me feel as if I were entering another world. Finally, I arrived at the address on the order. It was an old house located in the middle of a dense forest with no other houses around. The lights inside were off. There was no sign of life, just darkness and the sound of rain falling on the roof. I stopped the car, double-checking the address on my phone. It was here, but everything was so quiet, so still. I decided to go outside, but somehow I felt a chill. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped out into the rain. The ground beneath my feet was soft and wet, creating muddy tracks as I walked. As I approached the front steps, I noticed something odd. There were small footprints on the steps, likely those of a child. The muddy footprints, clearly imprinted in the dirt, led straight from the house to the front steps, then disappeared into the gloom of the woods. A chill ran down my spine. The rain continued to fall, and I stood still for a moment, staring at the footprints. Somehow, I couldn't figure out why there were footprints of a child in such a remote place, in the middle of a cold, rainy night. Swallowing, I decided to knock on the door, trying to finish my work and leave this place as quickly as possible. But after knocking a few times, I only heard a hollow echo from inside, as if the house was completely empty. There was no answer, no other sound except the pattering of rain. Just as I was about to return to my car, my phone suddenly rang. When I looked at the screen, I was startled to realize that the caller ID was the phone number for this order. Every beat of my heart echoed in my ears as I hesitated, then slowly pressed the answer button. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, then a faint, soft voice spoke. It was a child's voice, almost a whisper, almost lost in the pounding rain. "Did you see my footprints?" The voice rang out, and I felt a strange fear. "Who are you? Where are you?" I asked, feeling my blood run cold, but instead of answering, the voice just continued to whisper slowly and mysteriously. "Don't go in. They're still there." I suddenly felt as if my body was frozen, unable to move. My eyes turned to the front door of the house, the old door slowly opening, even though there was no one inside. There was only darkness waiting, as if something in the darkness was looking back at me. At that moment, I saw a small hand, pale and wet with rain, reaching out from the darkness of the door, waving slowly at me. My heart stopped, and in that moment, I felt an indescribable horror. It was not the hand of a child, but something lifeless, cold and strange, as if trying to pull me into the darkness. Without thinking, I turned around, threw the shopping bag on the ground, and ran to the car. Once I got in, I locked the door, stepped on the gas, and left the place as fast as I could. The rain poured down, each drop hitting the windshield, obscuring my vision. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the silhouette of the house fading in the rain, along with the image of the door still ajar, like a terrible reminder. From that night on, I never returned to that area again, and I have no idea who I delivered the goods to. But every time it rains heavily, and I'm alone on the deserted street, I still have the feeling that the child, or rather something that pretends to be the child, is still standing in the dark, in the rain, waiting for someone to come back and pull them inside forever. This is where tonight's story ends. When the rain stops, perhaps everything will return to normal, but perhaps something is still quietly waiting, lurking in the darkness and mist. If you ever pass an old telephone booth in the rain, stop and listen. You might hear a voice from the other world. Thanks for watching and have a good night. But remember, in the rain, sometimes there are things waiting. If only someone would stop and listen.